Hello, I'm Jeff Paur, senior writer with RealTime Fantasy Sports. Welcome to the RealTime Fantasy Sports Show. Joined by Logan Glaser once again. Logan, thanks so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jeff. First one of the 2023 season.
Yeah, we thought it'd be a good time now to address the player movement, the offseason player movement before this draft takes place, which is going to take place here shortly. So we're going to talk about the moves in the offseason, what they mean from a fantasy perspective, go over some of the big players that got moved. Should be a lot of fun.
Yeah, we are filming this before the actual NFL draft takes place, so there definitely could be a lot of changes after tonight.
Yeah, could be a lot more big moves. Derrick Henry, Austin Eckler.
For sure. Possibly Joe Mixon being dropped.
Joe Mixon too, yeah. So should be a lot of fun to talk about this and what it means from a fantasy implications. Also, our leagues are going off as we speak as well. You can get in all sorts of different money leagues. Our fantasy championship, $500,000 this year. Those leagues going off almost every night as well, drafts. So if you want to get in a draft, you can do it now.
Yeah, the BBC Scout is about full, and that will be filling up today. And then the BBC Main starts tomorrow, so that's exciting. And invitational invites will be sent out in the next couple of days. And also, it's a new little format with the invitational, so something to keep an eye out on.
Yeah, we'll definitely get into that when it comes, because that was a lot of fun last year. People love that league. And it filled up quick, too, so get in that when those invites come out. So you want to get into leagues on our site, go to rtsports.com, click on that Money League link. You can see everything we have to offer. Also, don't forget about our commissioner product as well, so check us out there. Let's get into this offseason player movement now, Logan. I think the big one, it just happened. Aaron Rodgers, it just became official, I should say. Aaron Rodgers to the Jets. I'm not sure about the trade, personally. I felt like they gave up a lot. They kind of had him, though, They kind of had.
They did, for an aging quarterback who said he might only play one more season, especially to give up that much for him. It's a lot.
Let's talk about the move itself, though. Now, Aaron Rodgers to the Jets. What do you feel about that?
So I think this is going to help the Jets more, like, to win games. But for a fantasy perspective, I don't know if it helps their wide receivers that much. So Aaron Rodgers did not have any games over 300 yards passing last year. Zach Wilson had 2 300-plus yard passing games in only 5 games that he played in. So Zach Wilson turned the ball over a lot more. Aaron Rodgers is going to take care of it. I think they will score more than they did with Zach Wilson, but I think the yardage is going to be about the same. And they also brought in several different wide receivers in the offseason to help Rodgers with that. So a guy like Garrett Wilson, I'm kind of looking at him about the same value as last year. I'm not putting him up anymore.
So I am bumping him up. I like Wilson a lot more this year. I think it's good for him getting Aaron Rodgers. Zach Wilson was not very good last year. I see what you're saying, though. He is aging, 39 years old, 12 interceptions last year, which was his most since 2008. Second highest total of his career as well. So that is a concern from a fantasy perspective for Rodgers himself. I am not considering him an elite option. I think he's outside that group. I think he's more of a spot starter personally, but I think he will have some big games. I think he'll play better this year. I think he has more talent around him than he had in Green Bay, at least at the receiver spot. Garrett Wilson, Allen Lazard, so he moves over from Green Bay, joins him in New York, but still, I think the talent's better. Garrett Wilson's a stud. I like him a lot this year. I think he could be a top 10, maybe even top 5 option before it's over with. I think he sees a bump into production, but for Aaron Rodgers, I'm not so sure that he does much better than he did last year. Could see a little better stats, but overall, not the same guy from earlier in his career, most definitely. So I like the Jets better as a team. I think they'll win more games. I think he helps their receivers, their running backs. Not so sure about him, though, doing much better than he has in the past. Let's talk about another quarterback now. Derek Carr to the New Orleans Saints.
Yes.
What do you think about that?
I think
trade?
Derek Carr was probably one of the most hyped up quarterbacks last year, just getting Devontae Adams. Everyone was so high on Derek Carr. You're seeing him going early in drafts, and he was a QB1 for actually most teams, being drafted probably about the 8th, 9th QB overall. And this year, I think it's an even move overall for Derek Carr overall. It's good for him to get back into that starting gig with the Saints. But for the Saints' perspective, I think he's going to have about the same passing yards as Jameis Winston did with the Saints. Obviously, he's going to have less turnovers than Winston. What was great about the wide receivers for New Orleans was Winston throws the ball constantly, even if you get some pick sixes in there as well, but that means they're back on offense immediately. So I think overall, for the Saints' perspective, it's going to be about even play for them.
So it's ironic you say that. My words that I jotted down, lateral move. So
Yeah.
I think it's about an even move as well. I might downgrade him attacks. I'm not sure he's going to throw the ball quite as much. He threw it a lot last year with Las Vegas. I think a lot of it might depend, too, on the health of Michael Thomas. So he has Chris Olave, really good. Michael Thomas pairs with him. If Thomas is healthy and back to near his old form, I think that really helps Derek Carr. But if he's not so sure, again, I think he's going to be a low-end number one, have some big games along the way. I like him better than Aaron Rodgers, personally, at this stage of his career. But for Carr, I think it's a bit of a lateral move in this one to New Orleans. But it does help the offense, in my opinion. All right, another big move, another former Las Vegas player, Logan, Darren Waller to the Giants. What's your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think, well, they also have Daniel Bellinger currently as their tight end for the Giants. But I don't think it should concern Waller that much. Bellinger only had 268 receiving yards last year, so it wasn't that huge of a factor. But Darren Waller is obviously going to be the number one tight end there with Bellinger sliding in behind him. I think the bigger concern is how much Daniel Jones actually throws to his tight ends with the Giants. So last year they had about 500 total yards between all of the tight ends for the Giants, multiple with 3 different tight ends there. Darius Slayton led the group with 724 receiving yards. So it's a little bit of a concern for him going just from a kind of more of a pass-heavy offense to kind of a running offense, especially with Jones and Barkley at the center.
Yeah, for me, I think it's all about the health. That's the issue with Darren Waller. If he can stay healthy, I think he can be really good in this offense, even if they are a little more run-heavy than what he was used to in Las Vegas. I think he has less to compete with for targets. He could get a lot of targets in this offense. Super talented player, but again, it's all about the health with him. I think he's a really high-risk, high-reward player, but definitely could do well if he's healthy in this offense, I think, because I think he could really rack up the targets. But again, comes down with health for Waller, and that's a concern for me. It's hard for me to pick him because of that. All right, next player, another Las Vegas.
There's a lot going on with Las Vegas.
Yeah, exactly. So Jimmy Garoppolo is headed to the Raiders to take over. They're number one. How do you think he's going to do in that offense?
Obviously, Garoppolo probably thrived with the 49ers offense. He had so many different weapons in that offense. So going over to Vegas, it's a good landing spot, I think, for him overall. I do think it's a downgrade from the 49ers offense overall, but I do think out of the possible spots that Garoppolo could have landed, Vegas is a good one for him. He's got Devontae Adams to throw to. Losing Darren Waller hurts a little bit, but you also have a great running game with Josh Jacobs. If you look at Garoppolo's stats last year with the 49ers, he was very consistent, hovering right around 225 to 250 passing yards per game, put in 1 or 2 passing touchdowns per game. He's not an attractive fantasy quarterback, but he's a consistent, if you're looking for 15 fantasy points from a QB, he's one that you can stash on your bench and kind of plug him in whenever you're starting quarterbacks on a bye.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that assessment. I think it is a great landing spot for him, though, personally. They like to throw the ball. He knows the offense. Josh McDaniels is there, had him in New England. So I think that's a positive. I think he might end up having career best numbers, but kind of like Darren Waller, you worry about his health. He has some injury issues in the past, tends to miss games. But I think he could be a good spot starter for fantasy teams. Moves to an offense, likes to throw the ball, has Devontae Adams, an elite number 1 receiver. Again, injuries are a concern, but I think he's going to be a good spot play for fantasy teams, have some big games along the way in this offense. Okay, let's talk about another tight end. Kind of surprisingly, we have 2 of them on this.
Yeah.
But Dalton Schultz signs with Houston. He was kind of the prized tight end out there, but he's doing it's a 1-year deal, if I'm not mistaken. Kind of a make or break, show me the money type deal. If he has a big season, he probably can end up getting a multi-year deal next year. But lands in Houston. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I was very surprised with him going to Houston. I think Dallas was a perfect fit for him. I'm surprised he didn't re-sign back there, but I think Houston actually could be an okay spot for him. I think he's going to immediately become the number 1 option. I guess the concern would be who's going to be throwing the ball to him. We're doing this before the NFL draft. Who knows if Houston goes out and takes a quarterback. But in the last 3 years, Dalton Schultz has combined for over 2,000 yards over the last 3 seasons, which is very impressive for a tight end, averaging a little over 700 yards per season. Last year he dealt with a little bit of injuries, but I mean, in games he was still getting 10+ targets per game, which is very impressive from a tight end perspective. But yeah, Houston's going to be a good fit. You got Brandon Cooks also on the move out of Houston, so Dalton Schultz should be the #1 kind of passing option right there. You also got Nico Collins in the wide receiver core, and they might also draft another wide receiver tonight.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is a good landing spot for him in Houston, but I have concerns too with the QB.
QB's the big one.
You don't know who's going to be the QB at this point, but Schultz could end up being the #1 target. He has at least 55 catches, three straight seasons. Easy for me to say, but he moves to a lot less uncertain passing situation from Dallas to Houston. That's a concern for me. QB is a concern, but I like his ability to get targets in this offense. Like you said, could be the #1 target. I think he could be a little bit hit or miss, so I see his touchdown numbers going down a little bit. I'm considering him a low-end #1 tight end at this point. So I want to talk about Carolina now. They made a lot of moves. They have the #1 pick. We don't know quite who they're going to take at this point.
I think we can assume.
Assume
Bryce Young.
Yeah,
but
sounds like Bryce Young, but they kind of overhauled that offense. They traded DJ Moore. 3 players come in, though. I kind of want to quickly touch on all of them. Miles Sanders, Adam Thielen, Hayden Hurst. So you got one at each spot. Let's first talk about Sanders. What do you think about him?
Yeah, Carolina gave up a lot to move up to #1, so I think overall that's going to hurt them in the long haul. But I really like this move, honestly, for all 3 of them, I personally think. So Miles Sanders started to lose touches to Kenneth Gainwell near the end of the season. And now he's coming to Carolina. He's going to be the running back 1. You also got Devontae Foreman on the move out of Carolina as well. So Sanders should get the clear #1 snaps. They're not going to put up tons of points, but he's going to get the volume, which you're kind of looking at that running back position.
So that's the exact same thing I had written down about him, volume. So he has less to compete with for touches. He's going to get probably maybe the most catches of his career. I think that's a positive for him. I think his fantasy numbers could be similar because I think his scores are going to go down.
Yeah.
He had a lot of scores last year, which kind of bumped him up. He was 15th overall in running back scoring last year. So I think he's going to be a high-end #2 back. I really like his chances for more volume in this offense, so getting a lot more catches than he's used to and a lot of touches in the running game. So I think that's a positive for him. And I like him. I like this move for him, but I think he can end up with similar, in that 15 range personally.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Adam Thielen. Once a fantasy stud, kind of hasn't been the same player in recent years. What do you think about
Yeah,
this?
he's aging a bit, so that definitely hurts him. But I think for Carolina, for Thielen, it's a great move as well. I think for volume reasons why. You got DJ Moore also out of Carolina, so Thielen can step up and almost compete for that #1 wide receiver role with Carolina, which isn't saying much. I think a lot's going to rely on who we're assuming Bryce Young will be that #1 overall pick and how well he plays, and it kind of molds that offense. But I do think it's a positive move for Thielen. I don't think he's going to be a must to have on your fantasy roster. I think he's going to be on your bench to start the season. I don't think he'll be a starter for anyone, but I do think that's a very valuable option.
Yeah, I agree. He's getting older, but a fresh start, bigger role with the new team, doesn't have Justin Jefferson to compete with. I think he's going to rebound a little bit. He's always been a good red zone target as well. But like you said, I have him as reserve material for fantasy teams right now. I think he's going to be a bench player worthy of some spot starts along the way. But again, I think it's a good move for him, moving from Minnesota to an offense that's looking for more playmakers in the passing game. And lastly, Hayden Hurst with Carolina. So he moves from Cincinnati to Carolina, gets a chance to be their #1 tight end. What's your thoughts on him?
Yeah, he was competing with so many targets in Cincinnati. So you got Jamar Chase, and without a clear #1 wide receiver, like kind of what we were just talking about, Thielen, the targets are going to be there for this Carolina offense. So I do think this is a positive move for him. He should see more volume in this Carolina offense. So overall, I do like this move. I think for all 3 of them, the volume is going to be there. So overall, it's a great move for all of them. I don't think it's going to really necessitate into winning for Carolina, but for a fantasy perspective, I do think it's good moves for all 3 of them.
Yeah, I agree. It might not help their winning, but I do think it's a good fantasy move. Hurst was 21st in fantasy tight end scoring last year, and he missed 4 games because of injury. Less to compete with targets, like you said. No T. Higgins, no Tyler Boyd, Jamar Chase, Joe Mixon. But I think he could be a nice security blanket for whoever is drafted #1 overall in the passing game. So I like him this season, and the move to Carolina. I think he could end up being a good spot play for fantasy teams. That position was really thin last year, and that platoon option isn't a bad way to go if you don't want to spend high draft capital on a tight end. So I think Hurst could end up being a nice platoon guy. All right, let's talk about DJ Moore now. So Justin Fields gets his number one receiver. DJ Moore heads there. What do you think about this move?
Yeah, I think this is a great move for Justin Fields. He's going to go out and now he has that number one wide receiver option. But I do think this hurts DJ Moore value, even though he should still be the number one in Chicago. He was also the number one in Carolina. But Fields only had 2 games last year where he passed over 200 yards. That's very concerning for DJ Moore, for especially where he was going in drafts for the past couple of years up in that first couple of rounds. It definitely takes a big hit for him with kind of a run first quarterback. I mean, last year Fields had over 1,000 rushing yards, only 2,200 passing yards. So it's definitely a concern for Moore, but this is a great move for Fields, and I think this definitely helps Fields' value, getting a number one wide receiver in.
Yeah, I kind of echo your thoughts there, Logan. I agree. I think it's a great move for Fields. Moore, I do think he'll do better this year, though. He's played in a poor offense in recent years and still produced. So I think he could do it again in Chicago with one of the best young QBs in the game. He had 3 straight 1,100-plus yard seasons before last season when they had all sorts of issues at QB in Carolina. So I still think he can produce. I think he's going to have some big games. I think he's going to get catches, too. So his floor might be pretty good. I'm just not sure he's going to have a lot of those huge games, but I like his floor this year. I think he's going to rebound, maybe be a good, solid number 2 for fantasy teams, DJ Moore, this year in Chicago. But like you said, great move for him, for Justin Fields, getting a number 1 guy like Moore.
For sure.
Let's talk about another receiver now. We got 2 more we're going to end with. They're both receivers. Next one, Brandon Cooks to the Cowboys. So he heads there. He's getting older, but he pairs with CeeDee Lamb. What do you think about his fantasy?
Yeah, I think overall it hurts Cooks a little bit moving to the Cowboys. He was that number 1 wide receiver in Houston the past couple of seasons. He does move to a better offense overall. You got Dak Prescott also throwing him the ball. I think they're going to be able to move the ball, score more, but he's not that number 1 option. A lot of time Brandon Cooks got points off of those garbage time late, with Houston being down 20, 30 points, and they were able to just completely pass the entire second half and score touchdowns and get yardage that way. But now he moves into a Dallas offense where CeeDee Lamb's the number 1. You also got Michael Gallup also kind of competing number 2 role with Brandon Cooks. Last year he had 699 yards with only 3 touchdowns with being the number 1 option, and now him moving into a secondary role, it will be hard for me to draft him this year. Unless if somehow Lamb gets hurt, then he can definitely move into a productive role, but if Lamb's healthy, then it's going to be hard for Cooks.
So I like Brandon Cooks more so in a best ball format.
Yes, best ball for sure.
I think he's going to have some big games, but I think he's going to disappear in others. He's getting older. He's going to be 30 this season. I don't think he's washed up just yet, but I do think he's going to be a little more hit or miss this year with CeeDee Lamb. He really vultures the targets, but at least he has Dak Prescott throwing him passes now. It's a big upgrade from what he had last year. Davis Mills had a rough year in Houston, so that's a big upgrade. He's had some huge seasons in the past too, Cooks, and he's not really super old just yet, so I think he can still do well this year. Again, I think he's going to be hit or miss, have some big games along the way, like him more so in a best ball format than standard leagues. Let's talk about one more receiver, another older guy. Didn't play at all last year. Odell Beckham, he heads to Baltimore.
Yeah, it's weird considering Odell Beckham to be older because it just seems like he was a rookie with the Giants, but he has not had over 350 yards since 2019. Injuries have absolutely derailed his career, but he could be the number 2 option in Baltimore behind Mark Andrews through the passing, so I think that's good for him. He's going to get some volume. I think Baltimore wasn't necessarily looking at getting Odell, but they kind of needed to just to keep Lamar Jackson happy. Lamar Jackson asked for either Odell or Hopkins to come in. Hopkins is also another name that could be on the move shortly. But I think overall, it's a good move, I think, for Odell, just going into being that number 2 option, I think, overall behind Mark Andrews. So he should see some targets, but again, the injury concerns there. He has not had over 350 yards in several years, so it's definitely some risk drafting Odell this year.
Yeah, I agree. I have no idea what to expect from Odell. He moves to Baltimore. It's a run-heavy offense. Who knows what's happening at quarterback? Lamar Jackson may or may not be there. I think he's going to be there, but who knows? He's coming off a major knee injury. He didn't even play at all last year, and there was thoughts he'd be healthy about halfway through the season, and he still wasn't healthy late in the year, apparently, as teams looked to sign him, worked him out. He did not play at all last year. So I have concerns. Again, more so a player I'm taking a chance on the best ball formats. I think in standard leagues, he just is going to carry too much risk for me. Injury concern, run heavy offense, quarterback issues. Just like you said, I might let somebody else draft him personally unless I'm in a best ball format.
For sure.
All right, Logan, that is our off-season player movement video. Appreciate you joining me.
Thanks for having me on. Thanks for having me on. Last year there was a lot of QB carousel going on, and this year it's kind of smaller names, but still lots to move.
Yeah.
Lots of players on the move.
Definitely. A lot of stuff still happened this offseason. A lot of stuff could still happen here in the coming days with the draft taking place. And we're going to do a draft recap video next week and talk about everything that happened in the draft, how it impacts fantasy players, teams, the rookies, you name it, we'll cover it. Don't forget also, go to rtsports.com. Get in some of our leagues today. We have all sorts of money leagues, different price points, different options, different contests. You can sign up, start drafting right now if you want. If you want to do it before the NFL draft, we'll have more drafts likely kick off before that happens tonight. But again, thanks so much for joining me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Jeff.
Looking forward to talking again next week, and I appreciate everybody watching out there. This has been Jeff Paur for RealTime Fantasy Sports.
And this has been Logan Glaser from RealTime Fantasy Sports.
Have a great day.